good morning. It is great to see all you here this morning. If you have your Bible with you, if you'll open them up to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 is where we're going to be. We'll get there in a second. We're in the second week of this series, Right Key, Wrong Door, which for all the explanations and jokes of rabbis and popes and things like that, is really about putting truth in its context and understanding the things that we believe, how they fit in with the rest of our world. And let me give a little bit of setup for today before we actually get to Matthew chapter 12. Today, what we're going to talk about is extremely important. And I just want to let you know, if you're here and it is your first time here this morning, we're thrilled you're in here today. But this morning is going to be a heck of a ride. So just hang on, because it's going to be interesting. Let me just say a couple things to set myself up for what's going to happen. When Jesus told his parables, he told them to make a point. And that's very important to understand. We're not actually looking at one of his parables today, but allow me to go down this path. One of the instances is he tells the parable of a master giving talents, which is units of money in their day and age, to his servants. And so to one he gives 5, to another he gives 2, to another he gives 1. And what happens is he goes off, the person with 5 and the person with 2 both invest it. They double their invested. The one with 1 is scared, so he buries his money and hides it. The master comes back, praises the first 2, kicks the last one out. And so the purpose of the story that Jesus tells, the purpose of that parable, is to simply say this. You need to be mindful of using your resources well, that you will be held accountable for that. This is what I've heard many different times. I've listened to messages and heard people talk about so Jesus gave the first person 5 talents. Now the reason why he gave them 5 talents is because this represented his history, his resources, his relationships, his gifts. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's what it is. I think he just gave him 5 talents because he had 5 talents. It doesn't, there's not some huge metaphor. And it's interesting because along the way, we've taken these things that make one very specific, direct point, and we've tried to make them say a whole bunch of different things. I say that to say that this morning, I'm going to give personal, so not church, personal commentary on a lot of issues. And there's going to be points in time throughout the morning where you're going to get a little uncomfortable, And if you're not I don't think I'll get uncomfortable, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. So because I feel, you're going to feel uncomfortable. And I just want you to know that everything that I'm saying this morning is to make one point and only one point. I kind of want you to know that I am, in my beliefs, in terms of my theology, I am extremely conservative. And it always makes me laugh because when people talk about our church and the methods, they think we're this super liberal church because we have lights and drums. And it's you don't understand, I am crazy conservative in my theology and my understanding of the Bible. I am really far on that side. And I could, for all the issues that we're going to talk about this morning, I could just sit down at the beginning and I could just be okay, so this is what I really believe on this, and this is what I really believe on that. But I really think that would defeat the point and miss the purpose for what we're talking about this morning. So I say all that to say, if you walk out of these doors and you're going, I wonder what he really thinks about this, I wonder what he really thinks about that, I want you to know, I am making one point and only one point this morning. And everything else is just to get us to arrive there. Make sense? Well, yeah, thank you. This is an overwhelming response. What are you talking about? I'll just assume that you all nodded your heads and went, we got you, Kevin. Right here. Thank you. There you go. You know what? I'm just going to talk to Eric. The rest of you, you can go. I can't see you in the back anyway. So, with all that said, let's look at Matthew chapter 12. This is what it says. It says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Now we read that and we would go, that's not that big of a deal. You need to understand the context of what is happening. God gave his people a very clear command. You are to honor the Sabbath, one day of the week, by resting. That's all he said. He said, you need to honor the Sabbath by resting. And so what people did in that day is the same thing we do today. He said, well, what does he mean by resting? instead of actually taking it by the purpose of what he's saying, let's draw out every minute detail and make a whole bunch of laws along the way as to what is actually resting. Because we couldn't actually just fulfill the purpose of what he's saying. And so they make all these different laws along the way. And it's like, well, this is what you can do. This is what you can't do. This is okay on the day of rest. These things are not okay on the day of rest. And one of the things on the list was that you could not work. You could not pick heads of grain or do anything like that. And so what the disciples are doing here in this moment is something that was incredibly offensive to the Pharisees, which is hard for us to get emotionally. Because it's like, okay, so they picked a head of grain on the Sabbath. Big deal. But for them, this would have been a huge deal, and lots of people would have been really bothered by this. If I give you an equivalent, this would be like on Sunday mornings, instead of serving coffee and donuts, we serve beer and chicken. I don't know why I threw chicken in, because there's nothing wrong with chicken. But beer and donuts sounded off. If we did serve chicken, I'd be okay with it. But okay, so bring it back just a second. This is like we serve beer for refreshments on Sunday morning. Now, I know some of you are like, well, okay, Kevin. I'll bring my friends. But we can just all agree that there are people who would be very offended by that. If we served alcohol in the church, especially on a Sunday morning, come on, first service is at 9:30. And so we can just agree that there are some people who would be very, very offended by that. And that's where we are in this spot. That the disciples are doing something that is incredibly offensive and considered wrong. And what's even worse for the Pharisees is that these guys who are breaking the law are getting promoted basically further than they are. These Pharisees, they wanted to be near Jesus, and they're following the laws. And these guys who are breaking the laws are the ones who are his closest followers. And so there's an issue here. And then this is what happens next. Verse 3. It says, he answered, he being Jesus, he answered, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. I'll explain that in a second. He says, or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? So Jesus gives two examples. The first one is this, that David at one point in time in history, he was going with his army of men, and they were going along. They had just come from battle a couple days ago. They hadn't eaten for a while. And there was this bread in the temple that was considered sacred, that no one was allowed to eat. And so David and his buddies come in, and they go, we're hungry. We haven't had a thing to eat. And so they ate the bread that was sacred. The second example that he gives is he says, okay, so you have laws about who can work, who can do stuff on a Sunday. He goes, what about the priests? The priests are working. They're doing stuff the entire time on Sunday. And yet it says they're not desecrating the Sabbath, or that they're still innocent along the way. Now, this is interesting to me, is because we have the disciples here who are picking heads of grain, and we go, why? Well, they're not starving. I guess if they just wanted a snack, and if they would have actually planned and prepped it out, then they would have had a snack. They wouldn't have had to pick heads of grain. So they're poor planners and they're lazy. That's why they're doing this. And Jesus is equating that scenario. He's saying, how is that different from David and his men when they were starving, eating the consecrated bread, and the priests working on a Sabbath? It doesn't seem right, does it? You read that and you're like, well, hang on, Jesus, those aren't the same. Those are very, very different things. So why are you saying that they're the same? And this is the question that it leads me to. What do you do when the rules and laws that you've agreed to live by, Jesus breaks? What do you do when Jesus goes against the things that you know to be right? It's very hard. See, this is my guess, is that every single one of us, we could come up with a list of these are the things you do, these are the things you don't do. These are the things that are right, and these are the things that are wrong. Every single one of us could sit down. We may struggle on a few issues here and there and say, well, how about this? I don't know. But every single one of us could very easily sit down and come up with a basic list of back and forth. And what Jesus does in this moment is he begins to blur the list. And he does something that makes me very uncomfortable. As he says, okay, you think it's black and white, you think it's right and wrong, I want to show you it's a little more gray than you think. Maybe things aren't as clear, cut, and dry as you originally thought they were. And what he's doing is he's asking this question. Why does truth matter? You see, for us this morning, the key is going to represent truth. Because every single one of us at one point in time in our lives, or something inherent within us, understands that truth is significant, that truth is important, that truth matters. And we grow up and we're encouraged along the way to pursue truth, to know truth, and to understand truth. But what's intriguing to me is no one tells us why. Have you ever thought about that? Like when I was a kid, I can remember I grew up in Sunday school, and so I went through all the classes, and they would teach us truth, and then they would put verses with it for us to memorize so that we could know truth, we could support truth, and we could argue for what is true. And so I had a list, and I knew this is right, this is wrong, these are the things you do, these are the things that you don't do. But no one ever paused to say, this is why it matters. This is why it's so important. And so what we need to figure out is what door does this key fit? And so we go along the way and we try all different sorts of things. For many of us, we start with this. We go, okay, so truth matters, but why does truth matter? Well, maybe it's so I know what path I'm supposed to go on. Maybe it's so I know what's right and what's wrong, and so I can make the best decisions possible so that I can live the life that I want. I would say, yeah, maybe that's part of it, but that's not the whole thing. And sometimes along the way we'll also go, well, maybe it's so that I don't live a lie. Maybe why truth is so important is because I don't want to spend my life living a lie. I want to live a life that is actually meaningful, that is significant. And if I don't know what truth is, I'm going to have the temptation to live my life out as a lie. And we don't want that. Or the other one, and honestly, we don't admit this, but I think this is probably the most common one, is, well, because I want to be right. Like, when issues come up, when certain situations come around, I want to know what's right so that I can be right. And that's important. And so we spend our lives pursuing truth because we know inherently within us, and we're told over and over again that truth matters, but we think the reason why is one of three things. It's either for our path, it's for meaning, or honestly, the other one is just pride, so that we can be right. And the problem is that doesn't fit with what Jesus is saying here. Like, none of those three reasons for why truth matters fit. And I think what Jesus is doing here is very significant. Is he's saying, yeah, your understanding of truth, that it matters, that's important. But the assumptions that you are bringing with you are wrong. The context for the importance of truth is all off. That's great that you're pursuing truth. Continue that. But you've missed it as to why it is so important. Now, before we continue on with this story, when this happens, one of two things take place. When we begin taking our nice, neat, tidy boxes that we like to put truth in and going, this is right, this is wrong, there's no confusion in the middle, so we can take clear stands on issues. And when someone begins to question that and work against it, we have one of two responses. The first one is we get violent, which I'll show you in just a little bit in the story. And the second one is we give up our pursuit of truth. That when someone goes, hey, this thing that you thought was right for your whole life, well, what about this? Well, how about this scenario? Well, how does that play out here? And as soon as we begin asking those questions, people get mad. They get angry, which is exactly what the Pharisees' response is going to be. But the thing that I see that happens far more common in our world today is people begin making questions, and our truth no longer fits in the nice, neat, tidy boxes and categories that we originally put them in. As people start going, well, if I don't know what's true there, then there must not be truth anywhere. And we quit our pursuit. This is the culture that we live in today. Well, if anything anywhere is a little gray, then there must not be right and wrong, and there must not be black and white anywhere. If anything is a little confusing, then there must not be truth at all. And I want to show you this morning that instead of getting angry, and instead of getting violent, or instead of abandoning our search for the truth, that this question should drive us deeper into why truth matters and why it is so significant. I believe wholeheartedly that there is objective, ultimate truth, okay? But I think it is very important that we know why truth matters. And that's what happens throughout the rest of this passage. So let me pick it back up in verse 6. This is Jesus continuing his discussion. He says, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. Now this is important because the temple was the center of their religious life. It was how they worshiped God. It was how they got forgiveness for their sins. And it was how they were instructed on what is right and what is wrong. And so everything that they understood about truth was centered on the temple. And he says, well, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. And he continues, if you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And he's saying all these things that you're wondering. He goes, you don't get it. I'm over it. Like, all these things, all these questions that you have that you think are found in an answer is really found in a person. And he continues, if that doesn't make sense, it'll make sense as we go. Verse 9. It says, going on from that place. Okay, so he's saying this is not a separate thing, this is continued. So what has happened, if I could just make sure we're all on the same page? We've got the Pharisees, they're upset because Jesus isn't living how they expect him to live. And he's going, your whole understanding of how the world works is off. And then it says, going on from that place, they're saying this is connected. So what Jesus does next, just hear this, what Jesus does next is very strategic. It is not accidental. It is not coincidence. What he does next is very purposeful. So going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, if any of you has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. We're going to come back to that. Let me keep going. Verse 13. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Why? Why are they plotting how they're going to kill Jesus? Because he picked some grain and because he healed a man? Well, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem like an appropriate response. No. Because he changed how they understood truth. And so they got mad. And they didn't know what to do. Because anytime we go, this is what I believe, and someone else goes, well, how about this? Well, how about that? Our tendency is to get angry. And this is what I think is happening. Is we're taught often in our lives that we need to be very clear and we need to be very objective of good and bad, right and wrong. The problem is that life does not always fit in nice, neat, tidy boxes. As much as we attempt, as much as I attempt to create clear categories of right and wrong, sometimes it gets a little more confusing. And we normally don't talk about it because we either abandon truth or we get mad. But I think it's time we need to have that discussion. So let me bring something up. How about the issue of abortion? If you were to ask me, what is my position on the issue of abortion, I would tell you I am for life. I am adamantly for life. You would say, well, doesn't a mom have the right to choose? I would say, I think the couple has the right to choose before they have sex because they know how that goes. Like, once you do it, you've already made your choice. You know that's a possibility. That's when you have the right to choose. But then if we kept going down the path, the questions would go like this. Okay, so what about when the pregnancy threatens the life of the mother? I would say I am for life. And I don't think we have a right to decide between two lives. And that's how I see it. There are two lives right there. And I don't think we have the right to choose in that moment. But then if you ask the next question, is where things get hard for me. How about when the unborn child and the mother's life are both at extreme risk? How about then? I go, well, that gets a little harder for me. Because I am for life. In an instance where instead of no one being alive, we could at least have one, I'd want there to be action. See, that's hard for me. If I made it personal, it gets even harder. What if it was my wife, who, just to be clear, is not pregnant, okay? You got 3 kids. That's enough, okay? But, like, what if it was her? And the child that was in her threatened both of their lives. And I'm looking at it and I go, well, I've got 3 other girls who need a mom. And so I think the thing that would cause the most life would be to act. People ask me, and I understand, okay, these are extreme hypotheticals. I get that. But I think it's important that we at least talk about it. People ask me, well, isn't that not trusting God to act? I go, well, if that's the case, like, we should never take medicine. Like, we should never have surgery. We should never do any of these other things that we commonly do to keep us healthy and to promote life. And again, I'm not trying to make a statement on an issue. I'm just saying that if you take some of these things, maybe to the extreme, but if you at least have the discussion, someone who is adamantly pro-life begins to question what that actually looks like. Let me take another issue, as if abortion wasn't divisive enough. Let's talk about homosexuality. If you were to ask me, what is my position on people who have same-sex attraction? I would say very clearly, I believe the Bible speaks very adamantly about it. I don't think it's gray. I don't think it's confusing. And how I look at it through the context of the Bible and everything it says, I look at the Old Testament and some of the passages there where it doesn't refer to it as a cause, it refers to it as a symptom. And I think that's an important clarification. And you can understand, I could talk for hours about this because I've studied it at length in terms of the fact that how the Bible refers to it, that as people expose themselves to sin and are subjected to sin, that one of the consequences that comes from that is same-sex attraction. That it's not a cause, it's a symptom. And I could compare that to the incredible statistics that no one wants to talk about today of people who have same attraction, who've been suffered at an early age some sort of physical, sexual abuse, or traumatic event. I just went and saw recently the movie The Imitation Game, which is about a guy by the name of Alan Turing, who's a genius, who has same-sex attraction, and how he was oppressed, and how he was discouraged, and how he eventually committed suicide from it, which is a horrible, horrible thing. And the point of the movie that it comes out is we need to support these people. We need to let them go, and we need to encourage them because there's all these things that have been done wrong. Which is absolutely right in some sense. But the thing that they ignore is that he was a loner who at a very early age immediately lost his best friend to death. That's going to traumatize somebody. But we gloss over that. And so if you were to ask me what is my position on the issue, I'm very clear. But then how about this? What about the kid who was born with both sets of reproductive organs? What about them? On the one hand, if I'm really honest, I go, God, what on earth are you doing? Like, life is confusing enough. Why would that even be a possibility? But what do you do? In most of those instances, a parent chooses within a week to have surgery as to what gender their child is going to be. So what happens when the kid whose gender has been chosen for them grows up and they like people of the same gender? Are they going to hell? I don't know. It gets confusing. It gets hard. And this is what happens, is we take something so important as truth, and we want to make it so clear and so easy and so oversimplified that it loses its power because we don't understand the purpose for why we pursue truth. And I believe Jesus outlines this very, very clearly in verse 11. And he says this. He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good." Now look at this. They had nice, neat, tidy boxes, clear, organized categories of how you act and how you shouldn't act. But Jesus says, in a moment, when it came to be down to doing good for someone, every single one of us knows how we should respond. And this is what he's teaching us. That the purpose of truth is to enable us to love people well. To love them in the most life-giving way that we possibly can. You cannot love someone well without truth. To give someone a permission slip to their own destruction is not love. Okay? I want to be very clear on this. A permission slip to do whatever you want is not love. But to use truth to stand up on your soapbox and shout everyone down with verses who doesn't agree with you is to distort why God gave us truth to begin with. Because he gave it to us to love people well. And this is what we've done, is we've taken truth and we've used it as a club. And we've used it to bully and beat down anyone who doesn't agree with what we believe. And so we'll shout Bible verses at them, and we'll give them points, and we'll give them views, and we'll tell them why they're wrong, and we'll bully them into hopefully believing what we believe. When the Bible talks about truth, it says this. It says that truth is sharper than a double-edged sword. And we say that, and we hear the word sword, and we're like, yes! Like, that's what we want. We want battle. But what it says next is important. It says, dividing joint and marrow. Well, that doesn't sound like battle. That sounds like surgery, doesn't it? That maybe instead of truth being a club, maybe truth is a scalpel. Maybe the reason why truth is so important is because it enables us to cut out the cancer of our lives and the illness and the sickness which would kill us, and it can lead us to a path of life. Maybe the reason why God gave us truth and told us so adamantly to pursue it is so that we can love people well and lead them in a way that gives them life. Let me tell you why this is so important. And here's the deal. We have got to get this right. Because the primary doctrine that our world gives us today, the ultimate virtue that it holds up above everything else, is tolerance. And the thing that we're told over and over again is that we must be tolerant. That is the key. We just need to be tolerant of everyone. Until this, we go, you need to be tolerant of everyone except for those who are intolerant. We need to accept all beliefs and all viewpoints and everything except for those who don't accept the beliefs and viewpoints and ways of life of everyone else. And I want you to know, tolerance is a horrible alternative to truth. And tolerance, if actually taken to its natural conclusion, will either break down and cause us to be hypocrites, or it will result in an absolutely horrible society. Let me explain it like this. One of the most common statements that comes with tolerance is this. You should be able to love whoever you want in whatever way you want. Like this is like the top doctrine given to tolerance today. Because we should accept everyone except for those who don't accept absolutely everyone. You should be able to love whoever you want in whatever way you want. Like, okay, that's fine. If that's tolerance, that's okay. What about the pedophile? Should they be able to love whoever they want in whatever way they want? Because I don't think we want that. I don't think that'd be a good thing. And then the tolerance people kind of backpedal. Well, as long as the other person is accepting of it. As long as the other person is, well, let's say of age and they can do this, as long as they're accepting of it, then you should be able to love whoever you want in whatever way you want. Say, okay, that's not quite tolerance, but all right. What about relationships that are filled with domestic violence and abuse? How about those? Here's the thing that we need to know about that, is that yes, there are many situations where the reason why that happens is because one of the members of the party in the relationship is scared, is afraid, or they have nowhere to go, which are problems we need to fix. But we need to be clear, there are other scenarios where that occurs and the person chooses to stay. And they don't want the person who commits the violence against them to be taken away. They would much rather they be there because they feel safer and more comfortable in that situation than anywhere else. So, okay, so if you should be able to love whoever you want in whatever way you want, what about domestic violence? What do we do there? Do we intervene? Do we stop? Because if we do, then we're hypocrites. But if we don't do anything, then we enable a society where people take advantage of each other and cause incredible abuse and inflict incredible pain on other people. Well, that's kind of an extreme. I don't think it is. We just had a recent example in our country's history. And I think this bridges the gap that everyone should have heard of this, where we saw an NFL football player punch and knock out his girlfriend in an elevator, carry her body unconscious like a bag of dirt, and then begin lying to those around him, the bystanders, as to what happened to her, saying she fell and hit her head. Then she married him. And we're supposed to go, it's fine. This is okay. And no one actually has the guts or the boldness to intervene and go, maybe this isn't what's best. Maybe this won't bring the most life. You see, what instead, if we actually follow through on this whole tolerance thing, we're either all hypocrites, or we enable the destruction of our civilization in the name of you can do whatever you want as long as you're not making anyone else do something that they don't want to. That's fine. You can live however you want, just as long as you don't tell anyone else how to live. And what we say is that truth is far better than tolerance. Truth is way better than tolerance. As long as we are using it not to take stands on issues, but to love people, truth is way better than tolerance. And sometimes I'll get asked questions in terms of what's our church's view, what's our church's stance on an issue or something like that. And I always have the same response, no matter what the question is. It comes from just like across the board, all these different issues, all these different circumstances, and I always have the same response. We are for people. Well, how about the person with this? Listen, we're for people. But where do you guys stand on this issue? Listen, we are for people. And some people may go, well, isn't that dodging the question? No, it's answering the right question. As long as you ask the wrong question, you're going to get the wrong answer. I'm going to answer the question that you should be asking, which is, we stand for people. And so when people come to me and they say, hey, I've got a friend who's really struggling with so-and-so. Can they come to church? Absolutely. Hey, I've got a buddy who they're into this lifestyle and they want to know, is everyone welcome? Absolutely. Everyone is welcome. Because we make our stand and we say truth is here so we can love people well. We just have to have the courage to actually speak it in love instead of letting it go. And this is why it's so important, is because here's the deal. Tolerance operates on its basic assumption that you're fine. No matter what you do, you're fine. But we understand something very different that shouldn't be a shock. People make bad decisions. They do. We sometimes go down a path that will ruin our lives, and we need someone to be able to step up, love us well, and speak truth into our lives. So where tolerance would encourage people and just give them a pat on the back no matter what's happening, truth can say things like this. Hey, Doug, how many, I know things have been hard, but how many is that? That is your 6th drink of the night. Listen, Doug, maybe we should switch it over to water. Or even Sprite if you want something a little harder, Doug. That's fine. But listen, I know things are tough, and I think your answer's in there, but I assure you it's not. And that's not the path you want to go down. Say, hey, Bill, listen, I know things are hard at home. And I know things have been kind of distant between you and your spouse recently. And yeah, I see Sally over there, and I know she's kind of cute, and she's funny, and you guys have been spending a lot of time together, and you've been paying a lot of attention to each other. But listen, here's the deal. I don't think that's what you want to do. And I know in the moment right now it seems like the easy and the obvious choice, and it seems like the better life, but listen, here's the deal. You're going to hurt a lot of people along the way, yourself included. And not just that, but what happens when things with you and Sally, when they get a little dry, when they get a little rough, when they get a little tense, because it's going to happen. You're not going to stick it out and fight through it and figure out how to make a better life because you've already left once. And once you've left once, it's that much easier to leave a second time. And is that the pattern you want to create for your life of leaving every time things are hard? Listen, I know everyone else is telling you you're fine and your home life is so difficult. But I don't think that's the life you want. Listen, Susan, I know you've got lots of questions. And I know you're looking for acceptance, and I know you don't really understand who you are in this moment, and you're just trying to figure it out. But listen, I don't think experimenting with your sexuality is what you want to do. I think that's going to give you far more questions than answers in this moment. And I think you should start exploring your faith instead and see what that actually leads to. This is what truth looks like when we love people well. And so, we must be vigilant in seeking out and understanding truth. And we must be incredibly bold in the way in which we love people. There is too much at stake for those around us, for us to take a back seat in this discussion or take the easier alternative of just standing up on our soapboxes and shouting people down when they disagree with issues that we believe passionately in. We must be vigilant in seeking out and understanding truth and bold in the way in which we love people. Let me pray for you. Father, I believe your heart breaks when we push people from you. Father, I believe you are weary of your followers getting angry and violent when we should be compassionate and kind. So, Father, for us, let us follow you. Let us seek you. Let us speak truth clearly. But far more importantly, Lord, let us be overwhelming in the way in which we love people. There are pockets of our society that are so accepting. They're so accepting and they're so welcoming. May we, as your church, be even more accepting and even more welcoming. May all who walk through these doors understand that they are not just entering a church, but they are taking part in a community which loves them for who they are, exactly who they are, yet cares enough about them to lead them on a path that will give them life. And so, Father, for each one of us who are here, help us to know you. Help us to follow you. And give us boldness in the way in which we encounter the relationships around us so we can lead them to you. Help us to love others as you have loved us. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus.